Hello, Algebraic Reasoning. Today we're going to be talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. So let's get to it. So what are parallel lines? Parallel lines are lines that are in the same plane that never intersect. So I guess the first question is what do we mean by plane? I'm not going to give you the formal definition, but think of a plane as a sheet of paper. It's a two-dimensional figure. And so if they're on the same plane, it's like you're writing on a sheet of paper, they never intersect. So if I was to draw, and this is obviously a quick sketch, but if they're parallel, you're going to look something like this, where the lines extend out, but they're never going to touch. They're the same distance apart. So they are always the same. I can read. They are the same distance apart always. Okay, the mind wants to think the way the mind wants to think. What that means is that these arrows and lines that I'm drawing, they're always the same distance if the lines are in fact parallel. See, they will have the same slope, and this is the big one. They're going to have the same slope, and we'll come back to that. The next one says they will always have different intercepts, and that makes sense. So let's draw another picture here. Right? If these two lines are in fact parallel, they will have to have different y-intercepts, because if they don't have the same y-intercept, well, they will become the same line, right? So that has to be the case. Vertical lines can be parallel if they have different x-intercepts. So what is this saying? Well, this is saying that if I have a vertical line, then as long as the other vertical line has a different x-intercept, they would be parallel. That's what the last one is saying. What do we mean by perpendicular? Well, perpendicular lines that intersect, when perpendicular lines intersect, they form right angles. So they form right angles. Okay. The other property that they have is that they will always have opposite reciprocal slopes. So, and I'll talk more about that a little later. What does reciprocal mean? Let me fit this in here. Reciprocal. What does reciprocal mean? Well, reciprocal means that when you multiply the two numbers together, let's call them A and B, they give you -1. What most of us think of as reciprocals, let's say we have a fraction like 3/2. I'm sorry. What does opposite reciprocal mean? I apologize. Opposite reciprocal means that when you multiply the two numbers together, you get -1. So the way we think of it, as most of you will probably think of it, is if I give you 3/2, the reciprocal of 3/2 is 2/3. If one of these is negative, then when we multiply them together, we would get -1. So let's do another example, because I think it helps to see what's going on. So what if I give you something like 4? Well, we know 4 is actually 4/1. The reciprocal just means flip numerator and denominator, which is 1/4. But if it's opposite, one of them has to be negative. So if the first one is positive, then the second one has to be negative, and hence, when we put them together, we'd have a slope. We'd have a product of -1. Again, product meaning when you multiply the numbers together. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The illustrations illustrated these two facts, right? Find the reciprocal. So if the slope was 3/2, the reciprocal is now 2/3. And the second part is flip the sign. So if it's negative, now it's positive. If it's positive, now it's negative. Okay. The last point is actually, I illustrated it back here when I drew these lines going up and down, which is that vertical and horizontal lines will be perpendicular. So if you're basically the XY grid, your coordinate plane is an example of perpendicular lines. Okay, so now since we've discussed this in intimate detail, we can now attack the question. So we're going to attack number 3, but let me put it down here so we have a little more space. So here's number 3. What is an equation in slope-intercept form of a line that passes through 215 and is parallel to the graph y equals 4x minus 1. So we know that slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. We also know that it passes through the points 2, 15, where this is x and this is y. And then it says it is parallel, so this part here was the point, it is parallel to the graph y equals 4x minus 1. Okay, so what did you notice that I did here? Well, I hope that what you noticed is that as I read across, I went through and I wrote what's relevant in the problem. So we wrote y equals mx plus b, we wrote the point 215, and then we wrote down those values, right? So now what do we do? Well, the first thing I want to stress is that if it is in fact parallel, then the only thing that I care about in this equation is the slope, okay? So every other aspect of this equation is irrelevant. So a lot of students look at this and they're thinking the y-intercept is important or something like that. No, the only thing I care about is the slope. The slope is the number in front of x when written in y equals mx plus b. Okay, so what do we know about parallel lines? Well, that was the first point, right? That was this one right here, right? And what we know about parallel lines is that they have, and this was the point I was emphasizing, they have the same slope. So the only relevant fact that this gives me is that in my new equation, the slope is 4. So when I go over here, I know my slope is 4. Now we also know that, again, it passes through the points 2, 15. So we know x is 2 and y is 15. So notice I'm plugging in x is 2 and y is 15. And so now we have our equation. So now we can solve this. So let's go through and solve this. So this is 15 equals 8 plus b, and we'll get b by itself by subtracting 8, and hence b is 7. Now we can put it all together. And putting it all together, we see that y is equal to the slope, 4x plus 7. And there's my answer. Okay? So very, very, very important. The only new thing that we've added from the previous classes is the parallel, means it has the same slope. What I always like to think is that when I see the two L's in parallel, I write them horizontally and say, oh, they have equal. So it has equal slope. And because it has the equal slope, the only thing I care in this equation right here, right, the only thing that matters is the slope being 4. That's it. Don't take anything else from that. From there, it's just substituting in like what we did in previous class lessons. Let's go on to the next one. Number 4. What is the equation in slope-intercept form of the line that passes through 610 and is parallel to the graph y equals 13x minus 1. So this is essentially the same problem that we had discussed from before. So you should be able to do this all on your own, but let's go over it together in case you're still having issues. So notice what I did here. I rewrote the slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. Then it says it passes through the point 610. So I will write the point 610. And is parallel. Now, in this scenario, it's parallel to this graph. All I'm going to write right now is 13. And my question to you is, why just write 13? Why not write more? Why not write the equation? And the answer is, of course, because the only relevant fact is that the slope is 13. Okay? So again, we know that this is xy, and the slope is 13. So I'm just going to put it all together. So we have, I guess I should. All right, 10. So 10 equals, let's see here, m, which is 13. So 13. X I'll do x in gray. X is 6 plus b. So we solve this. This is going to give me 10 is equal to 13 times 6 is the same thing as 10 times 6, which is 60 plus 18. 60 plus 18 is 78 plus b. And then I'm going to subtract 78. I'm going to get negative 68 is b. And then we'll put it all together. So we'll say y equals 13x minus 68. Keep in mind that if you were hesitant to say, is that right? You could always substitute back in these x and y points, and you would see that it is in fact true, right? If I do 78 minus 68, I get 10. I end up getting 10, which is the y value. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's move on to the next one. Are the graphs 2y equals negative 3x plus 6 and y equals 2/3 x plus 2 parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Okay, so in order to solve this question, we need to put everything into y equals mx plus b format. So let's take the first equation, which is 2y equals negative 3x plus 6, and ask ourselves, how can I convert this into y equals mx plus b? Well, hopefully you realize that putting in y equals mx plus b is a fancy way of saying you get y by itself. Okay, so y equals negative 3 over 2x plus 3. The second equation, I guess that what we should ask ourselves is it in y equals mx plus b? And hopefully you said yes. Okay, so now we have a slope of negative 3 over 2 and another one of 2/3. And the question is it parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So we played a lot in the past two questions with parallel. We know that parallel, we look at these two and we say equal, so they have equal slopes. What I boxed, are they equal? Hopefully you said no. Then we'll go to the next question, which is, are they perpendicular? So maybe what we need to do is go back to the beginning and talk about what perpendicular means. Well, perpendicular means they have opposite reciprocal slopes. So did I switch the numerator and denominator? Does 3 and 2 versus 2 and 3, did I switch the top and the bottom? Did I switch numerator and denominator? And hopefully you're saying yes. And then the second part of perpendiculars, are they opposite? Opposite just means that one is negative and one is positive. Is that what's going on? Well, we can see here that this is negative. We can see here this is positive. So the answer is yes, it is perpendicular. So now that I know it's perpendicular, I take the only relevant fact from that, which is that the slope, I'm looking for more to answer the question. That's all the question's asking. So the answer to the question is yes. Let's move on. Okay. Are the graphs negative 5y equals 2x plus 3 and y equals 2/5 x plus 4 parallel, perpendicular, or neither? All right, so here we're going to do the same thing. So hopefully you're asking yourself, are the equations both in y equals mx plus b? Clearly the first one is not. And you're answering, and you know the answer to the question of, well, why aren't they? Why is this not in y equals mx plus b? Which is clearly that the y value is not by itself, so we'll divide through by negative 5 in order to put it by itself. We get negative 2/5 x minus 3/5. By the way, don't stress over the y-intercept. You may be looking at the y-intercept, oh my goodness, it's a fraction. That's not a big deal. All we care about is the slope, and I can't stress this enough. Okay. Then we're going to look at the second equation and ask ourselves, is it in y equals mx plus b? And hopefully your answer to that is absolutely. Y is by itself, and the slope is 2/5. And then we have to entertain the question, are these parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So are they parallel? Again, equal sign, right? Parallel lines have equal slopes. And you have to be careful here because sometimes we kind of run on like autopilot and we think 2/5, we see 2/5 and we're like, oh, so they are parallel. But they are not actually parallel. because the first one is negative and the second is positive. Okay, so are they perpendicular? Do they have opposite reciprocal? Well, again, remember, opposite reciprocal means do I flip the numerator and denominator? Well, we just said 2/5 are the same, so that can't be going on. So that leaves me with neither. Okay. Number 7, what is the equation in slope-intercept form of a line that passes through 10, 15, perpendicular to the graph of y equals negative 5, 6x minus 2? Okay, so exactly like before, it's slope-intercept form, which we hopefully know is y equals mx plus b. It passes through 10, 15, which is x and y. And is, now this is the interesting part, is perpendicular to y equals negative 5, 6x minus 2. So I'm actually going to write m equals 6 over 5. And the question to you is why? Okay, and the answer should be it's m equals 6 over 5 because when we see perpendicular, we do what's called opposite reciprocal. So opposite means, if I'm going to rewrite the original slope, if the slope was negative 5 over 6, opposite means if it starts off as a negative, right? Opposite means you change the sign. So opposite means if it's negative is now positive. Reciprocal means you flip numerator and denominator. So if it's 5 over 6, when you flip it, it's 6 over 5. Okay, we have all the relevant information. We're going to solve. So solving just consists of substituting in. So we're going to plug in the y value, which is 15, right? We're going to plug in the x value, which is 10. And then we're going to plug in the slope, which is 6 over 5. And everything else is still the same. So equals times plus b. Okay, and then we'll solve. Okay, now remember, when you want to multiply, we want to actually divide first. So 10 divided by 5 is 2, and then 6 times 2 is 12. That is the easiest way because when you divide first and then multiply, you are making the numbers smaller. Smaller numbers are easier to deal with. Next move, subtract 12 from both sides, and b is 3. So if b is 3, right, and the slope is 6 over 5, then the equation is just y equals 6 over 5x plus 3. Let's move on. All right, last one. What is the equation in slope-intercept form of the line that passes through 6, negative 7, and is perpendicular to the graph of y equals 2x plus 3? So again, it is slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. 6 equals negative 7 is the point. And if it's perpendicular, notice the slope here is 2. So the perpendicular is going to be opposite reciprocal, which is negative 1/2. Recall, 2 is the same thing. If we want to write it as a fraction, it's 2 over 1. Okay? So now we're just going to substitute it back in. And at this point, I hope everything, this step is second nature to you. So it's going to be negative 7 equals negative 1/2 times 6 plus b. Negative 1/2 times 6, so half of 6 is 3. So negative 3 plus b on the right side. We're going to add 3 to get b by itself. It's going to give me negative 4 equals b, and put it all together. Y equals negative 1/2 x plus negative 4. Or, you know, I want to stress it can also be this. Either way, potato, potato. You'll see me jump, obviously, between the two. Okay? And that is it. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have any questions, please reach out to me.